Hi, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at Turbo 360 Cost Analyzer, and we're going to have a look at a real world scenario where we had a cost spike around Azure Storage, and we're going to look at how we use Turbo 360 to troubleshoot that issue. So before we jump into the Turbo 360 portal, let's take a quick look at the architecture here. So this was a document 360 issue. Um, a really simplified view of the architecture here is that we have on Azure, we have a number of resources. Obviously, there's much more than just this, but for the purposes of this walkthrough, we'll keep it quite simple. So that was in Azure. We've got a web app here that integrates with MongoDB. We've got content gets served from a storage account. So the user comes in through Cloudflare for a CDN, and then they either hit the web app or the storage, depending on what functionality they're looking at. Now, what happened is we saw a spike on our costs. We started looking at some of the costs around the storage account and found a few optimizations we could do, and a slight misconfiguration we had. So we'll have a look into how that was achieved. So here in Turbo 360, we're looking at the cost analyzer module up here. So this node here is where I manage the costs for document 360. You can see currently it's healthy. I've got some deeper dive graphs where I've looked at specific scenarios that we've had. So we're looking at this graph where we were looking at this cost routing issue, the storage routing issue. So what happened was we had an alert triggered because we had a cost anomaly, and you can see here we had this unexpected spike in cost that we started looking into. But what we also noticed was these costs over here were a little bit more than we were expecting, so we had to look into how we could, number one, could we lower those costs, and number two, what caused that cost spike and what kind of things could we do about it. Okay, so here we're looking at a second tab I've got where I went below just the storage costs, just this new tab here. I created a graph really simply where I was looking at just the resources, the storage resources. I've got a daily line graph over the last quarter just tracking the costs. So the first thing I could tell was this was my production storage account. The other ones generally looked okay. So this one was the one we could see this big cost spike. The alerts that fired out told us kind of it was that storage account anyway, but we're just looking at the other storage accounts here to validate what other costs are going on. So the two questions we've got reiterating at this point are, can we do something about these costs here? What caused this cost spike? So here I've got a screenshot of the storage accounts. There's a couple of things we're looking at. The first one we're going to look at is the just the general routing costs. So here you've got these two settings here, and previously, before we made the change, we had this Microsoft network routing. The other option was internet routing. So what we did is when we just looked at the general cost, could we lower it? We realized we missed a bit of recommendations from Cloudflare where they actually say you should use the internet routing. Now, obviously, there's differences in how that routing affects the way a client routes through the networks to reach the content. Because we're going through Cloudflare, obviously the user's going to hit Cloudflare from their machine. Cloudflare is then going to route through Azure. So Cloudflare recommendations were to use internet-based routing. Now, when we investigated that, it's quite difficult to really understand what the impact on cost would be from changing one option versus the other. So hopefully, in the graphs we'll look at in a second, you'll get a flavour of that. Personally, I couldn't really find anything giving me specific detail about what the expected cost changes would be or any guide figures, but I think the general recommendation from Cloudflare was to use internet routing. So here we can see the documentation from Cloudflare. So we're in this partner section, and they've got a specific bit of guidance about using Azure with Cloudflare. And you can see here they've got the indication of using internet routing for your routing preference to the storage account. So we made that change on the storage, and then we could kind of see the impact on the costs on doing that change. And really, it's just how the traffic gets from Cloudflare to our storage account. So what we could see when we look at the impact of that change, really we're looking at this section here, was using the Microsoft routing. And then we can see when we made the change, kind of here's the impact afterwards. So we have an obviously the traffic that comes through varies a little bit over time, but generally we've got about the same traffic, and we probably expect an increase in traffic, if anything. But the costs here, you can see the Microsoft routing was generally costing definitely over £50 per day, but sometimes getting up close to 100. Whereas after we've gone to the internet routing, you can see we've got a much flatter sort of, definitely well under £50 most days. So that internet routing change has definitely got an ongoing cost reduction for us, which is really good. So that was quite a difficult thing to spot. Took a bit of investigation, but we've tuned those costs a little bit. This really falls into the bracket of a misconfiguration of your solution where we hadn't quite followed the guidance from Cloudflare. We paid the cost impact of that for a period of time. We've now reduced those costs ongoing, making our solution more sustainable. So that's one of the issues dealt with, was by changing the routing. The second issue was really about this cost spike. So what we hadn't really thought about at the time was one of the deployments, effectively they purged the cache of content on Cloudflare. So what that means is that while we have quite a lot of content there, the next time each piece of content was requested, that's going to recache it on Cloudflare. So there's going to be a lot of traffic, which normally would have, the user would just hit Cloudflare, get the content, and it would never have hit the storage account. In this case, it's actually going through Cloudflare to the storage and repopulating the cache. So really this big spike here was all about, because we'd purged the cache, and it took a couple of days till the significant amount of content that gets accessed on a regular basis to that had all been accessed, and the cache was fully filled again. So for us, the lesson learned was, actually, if you have to purge the cache, there's going to be a cost spike because of that, and we need to just factor that into our operations of the solution. Okay, so if we just think about our lessons learned here, then, so in this scenario, the routing preference for Cloudflare was internet routing, so follow the documentation. If you're building a solution that works in a similar way, serving content from storage, make sure you've checked, whether it be Front Door or Cloudflare or another third party, make sure you've double checked the routing preference for the storage account to optimize it in the right model for the how your content's going to be served. And then think about cache purges. So for example, if you purge the cache on Front Door, Cloudflare, or some other CDN solution, you're going to have that spike in cost because of the cache being refreshed on your CDN edge servers. So hopefully this was an interesting video just to discuss an issue that we had, how we used Turbo 360 to investigate the issue, and I think hopefully these kind of videos have value for people. So each time we find our own little cost tunings and little experiences, we'll share them, and we'd love to hear what kind of things people discover on their journeys managing Azure costs. Thank you for listening today. Have a great week.